So this is we called this meeting for the purposes of hearing from the administration, planning department, and the proposed development partner, Fallon Company, about a couple of pieces of legislation that have been filed. The proposed master development agreement with Fallon Company and the MOU with TPAC regarding a site on the initial development area of the East Bank. And so we will jump straight in. I know we've got a presentation from the folks who've joined us here. We'll have time for questions and discussion following the presentation, or we can, if y'all want to segment it and have some questions after a section of the presentation, I'm happy to facilitate that as well. Let me make sure I've got the mics on for the presenters. Could you guys check the two microphones and see if they're working for me? Okay, both mics are working, so y'all can take it away if you just please introduce yourself and jump into it.
Thanks, Chair Parker. I'm Bob Mendez, the Mayor's Office Chief Development Officer, and I've got on my right Anna Grider from the East Bank team and the Planning Department, and on my left Brian Ah, the President of the Fallon Company. And we're going to provide a presentation this afternoon, of the two pieces of legislation that are pending. We're going to start with Anna Grider. We'll talk about centering us with Imagine East Bank and how we got to where we are today. And then Mr. Ah and I will talk about the development agreement and lease terms. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what happens next with the legislation that's pending. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Anna.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. Hopefully that microphone is picking me up okay. So as Bob mentioned, I'm Anna Grider. I'm with the Metro Planning Department and on the East Bank team working on the implementation of Imagine East Bank. And I'm just going to provide some background on the vision plan and how we got to where we are today in terms of its implementation. So the Planning Department, in anticipation of transformational redevelopment coming to the East Bank through both Oracle, Station East, and the Titans, worked with some expert consultants to undertake extensive technical analysis, urban design inquiry, and robust community engagement outreach to shape a vision through Imagine East Bank to ensure that this part of our city is developed with high quality and coordinated public and private development. Community engagement resulted after 21 months of engagement and study, resulted in 4 main vision priorities: equity and affordability, mobility, resiliency, and building neighborhoods. And the plan was adopted on October 6th of 2022. So the first core principle of the vision plan, equity and affordability, is to be addressed in all aspects of future development and is woven throughout the vision plan. In both, you see that in transit, bike, and pedestrian network and public spaces, as well as in direction for a range of housing types for various income levels from deeply affordable to market rate, as well as strategic hiring of local residents and workforce training and the inclusion and participation of small, minority, and women-owned businesses. With safe and simple multimodal connections that prioritize non-auto uses and the experience of transit riders, cyclists, and pedestrians, which includes plans for Nashville's first dedicated bus rapid transit system and a robust system of dedicated, separated, protected bike lanes and filling in gaps in our greenway system. With respect for the river, we outline an environmental strategy that links flood resiliency and stormwater management with the creation of vibrant park spaces and greenways that provide a variety of river-oriented activities. And finally, neighborhoods for Nashvillians. Imagine East Bank envisions 4 new neighborhoods that are walkable and connected with development that is local and distinctive thoughtfully responding to Nashville and its cultural life, built context and history with a mix of uses. And guidelines are proposed in this chapter for the development of buildings, streetscapes, outdoor spaces, including standards for parks in the public realm and for great streets. So this is our illustrative plan showing the East Bank in the context of all the way from the interstate to the river. It's an ambitious plan for an almost entirely new East Bank from the ground and literally the underground up. And it will take decades to be fully realized. And we're grateful for the opportunity today to address key mobility goals, direct future growth in a meaningful way to create new neighborhoods for Nashville. The scale and the amount of work is really driven home when you look at the East Bank today, and you see some of the most significantly underutilized land in our core. So the final chapter of Imagine East Bank focused in detail on the steps to implement the vision. And here you see the first item is to set forth a clear process for the redevelopment of Metro-owned property on the East Bank consistent with the Imagine East Bank vision. So this is the Metro-owned property. As illustrated in the vision plan, it is approximately 130 acres directly across the river from downtown, with KVB on the south and Woodland and James Robertson to the north. So the plan was adopted in October of 22, and in November of 22, Council gave us permission to issue an RFQ for the development of the first 30 acres of Metro-owned land. That RFQ was released in January of 23, and the graphic on the screen depicts the area. So you see the red and the green parcel. The green is for the location of a mobility hub. Those are the initial 30 acres for development. The areas that don't have color blocking on them are currently encumbered by Nissan Stadium. And the blue lines represent the location of infrastructure necessary to support the development of this first 30 acres. The RFQ stated clearly that the site must be developed in a manner consistent with the principles and priorities in the vision plan. So we went through an 8-month selection process with 3 rounds of review, and the Fallon Company was selected to move forward into negotiations for a master development agreement that is the subject of this meeting to govern the initial 30 acres. And you see on the screen their team of sub-consultants working with them. They were selected based on their ability to deliver development that builds a neighborhood that best serves Nashville, including green spaces, affordable housing, multimodal infrastructure, and high-quality design. And so here is a slide tying together the principles and priorities of the vision plan with the items that Bob and Brian are going to discuss shortly, showing how the vision plan is being followed through into the master development agreement. Fallon were selected in part for the capacity to maximize the community benefit across these vision plan priorities for economic outcomes, including diverse and attainable housing, municipal infrastructure needs, environmental impacts, and the facilitation of outstanding neighborhoods, including the opportunity for cultural facilities. So I'm going to pass it over to Bob for the next portion.
Thanks, Anna. I know for a lot of you that you're familiar with Imagine East Bank, and that was a little bit of a recap, but we wanted to at least spend the first 10 minutes talking about where we've been and how we got to where we are today. And the hope is that y'all can see the places where we've tried to bring the Imagine East Bank plan to life in the documents that we've got pending before the council now. So this slide is really just a table of contents about what we're going to talk about next. I will tell you that I think if we had one of those word clouds, neighborhood is the word you've heard the most so far, and the word you may hear the most the rest of the way through. We've done our darndest to try to make it so what we're incentivizing is a neighborhood. This slide is similar to one that we showed at the last council committee meeting. This is the draft master plan that's attached to the documents. And I want to mention a couple things about this before moving off of it. Okay. All right. Getting a little technical advice on the side here. Thank you. So just to orient to where we are, Fallon will start with buildings on what's on the right side of the screen here, the right side of the football stadium, and then work their way toward the river. The couple parcels on the left side of the screen, that's to the north of the stadium, will happen last. In the order of when these things get developed. And TPAC, while Fallon is starting closer to the football stadium on the right, TPAC will be on the parcel shown as E here. And so it should be the first buildings that we see coming out of the ground are two buildings to the right of the football stadium, one on each side of Shelby/KVB, and then the TPAC facility at parcel E. We have, consistent with the idea of neighborhood, have tried hard to work on pedestrian bike mobility for the area. It's a little hard to tell on this map, but the ramp between between E and E1 is meant to indicate a ramp and staircase that will come down from the pedestrian bridge to street level at Victory. That'll be one way to access the pedestrian bridge. And then also in the parcel right in the middle, where you see the pedestrian bridge end in a little bit of a Y shape, that'll be more stairs and a way for bikers to access the pedestrian bridge. And we're hopeful as plans develop that we end up with a third way onto the pedestrian bridge closer to the river at what would be the bottom of this screen now. We are trying to make it so through construction, there is temporary access at all times to the pedestrian bridge. So there's never a point in time where the pedestrian bridge is shut down during construction. It's also important to us in the documents, make it so no user or neighbor of the pedestrian bridge will ever be able to shut it down in the future. I know sometimes around Ascend and around the Sound Stadium, greenways can be blocked off. The hardcore written in these documents is the pedestrian bridge will not be able to be shut down by a private party user for games or special events. We've also, as I mentioned at the last council committee meeting, we've wanted to drive residential milestones as the key to building a neighborhood, on the theory that if neighborhood is our goal, you can't have a neighborhood without people living there. You can't have people living there without residential units. So the most important milestones and land use criteria are to have residents, to have homes there. Brian is going to talk about the affordability components a little bit later, but I wanted to mention on this slide. We've also, in listening to feedback from the council committee meeting in January, have reached an agreement with Fallon to deliver a daycare as part of the first residential building that is built. And again, in furtherance of a neighborhood, the agreement requires ground floor retail in all buildings. And we expect that when we introduce update to the downtown code to include this initial development area, it will have restrictions on concentrations of bars in an effort, again, to focus on neighborhood and keep the party, which we value, and our tourism industry that we value, but trying to keep the party on the other side of the river where it is now. We're going to have caps on the number of hotels in order to, again, try to keep the balance between residents and hotels in the right place. We are going to have limits on, I should have mentioned at the top box, no short-term rentals in the initial development area to make sure that people who live there actually live there, and it's not just a extended hotel zone on event weekends. And then finally, for office, I think many of you know that it's basically impossible to finance an office building in Nashville and much of the country right now. But we're going to be at this a while, and so we've asked Fallon to reserve at least one parcel for office development for a certain amount of time, 10 years, and then we would shift to another possible use after that time if the market doesn't come to support new office buildings by then. This slide has more details about the development milestones. And again, these are tied to us wanting to deliver residential units as the basis of forming a neighborhood. And so in order for Fallon to keep going in pulling down additional parcels for further development, they need to meet these milestones on time in order to make that happen. The last of the residential parcels to be developed would be what was shown as the green parcel, Parcel A, which is close to James Robertson Parkway. There's substantial infrastructure challenges there, and that James Robertson Parkway has to be reworked to be at grade instead of 20 feet in the air. And so the milestone for the last 300 units won't start clicking until James Robertson is lowered to grade and the East Bank Boulevard has been installed. All right. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Off from the Fallon Company to talk about affordable housing.
Thanks, Bob. Sort of continuing on the theme of neighborhood, that's really been an important thing as we think about the residential program generally, but in particular, the affordability of the residential units that are going to be built as part of the initial development area. And this is, again, as Anna mentioned earlier, really building on one of those key themes of Imagine East Bank. So we really want to emphasize affordability in residential units. We also want to, frankly, as Fallon, take it a step further and really set a new standard for what Nashville does in terms of affordable housing. So a few key points are up here on the slide. I'll start with one right in the middle, which is the affordability to remain in place for the 99-year duration of the lease. So that's really trying to take that and ensuring that for the entire time that private development has control of the land, that those affordability restrictions are in place. And to elaborate on those affordability restrictions a little bit, so there's a couple elements to it. Theme, again, having it apply all across the initial development area, not just in one place or another place, but really throughout the residential components. So there will be a couple all affordable residential buildings totaling 600 units, including one of those buildings built as the first phase of the development. That will also have the daycare in that building. And then for each of the other residential buildings, they will have 10% of the units in those buildings as affordable as well. So again, really trying to spread that affordability throughout all of the residential units. And the range of affordability will also be rather wide. So all the way from market rate units to 80%, 60%, and all the way down to deeply subsidized 30% AMI units. And to get a little more specific on that, in the all affordable buildings, 2/3 of the units will be affordable for people making 60% of area median income, AMI, and lower, including those 30% AMI units. And then the other third will be between 61 and 80% of AMI. And then in the market buildings, the 10% affordable units there will be affordable to those making up to 80% of AMI. So again, really running the range of affordability. And then I think the other thing would just be to say that the units will have high quality construction and will also have a range of bedrooms from studios all the way up to 3 bedrooms. So again, really trying to run that range of different types of units along with the different types of affordability. Pass it back to you, Bob.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we're going to talk about infrastructure. So I think it ought to be readable in the room. So let me just get you oriented in this chart. Most everybody's going to want to read that middle column, funding responsibility first. But I also am going to talk about the top part of the chart separately from the bottom line where it says optional for IDA to be determined. I'm going to talk about that separately. For the top part of the chart, this is a list of the major infrastructure projects needed to develop the 30 acres. And we've got it broken down by funding responsibility and construction responsibility. You'll see that for both TPAC and TPAC and Fallon, there's substantial projects that need to be taken care of. For Metro, there's two pieces that Metro would fund, one piece where Metro would be responsible for the construction. Now, the numbers that are on here, we're trying to err on the side of over transparency. And so let me take a minute to walk through what the numbers mean in the different columns. The first column of numbers that says HDR estimates current construction cost, that is meant to be if you went out to get a contract for it right this second and it was just the construction cost and nothing for soft costs, contingencies, escalation, just what it costs to build it, that would be that number. So almost certainly those numbers are at least a little bit low. And then total project cost is when we asked our infrastructure folks, like, don't be wrong, like what's the fully loaded number of everything that could possibly go into it? They added what you see is listed in the asterisk there of costs, contingencies, escalation, and planning it for the year of expenditure as opposed to immediately. And I think most development people I've talked to feel that that's definitely an overestimate. But these are the numbers we've been given as far as like the one hand, what it would take to go build it right now with no extra cost or no contingencies built in. And the second column is a fully loaded, not going to go over it sort of number. To the best of my ability to figure it out in conversations with everybody involved, I think the actual cost would turn out to be closer to the first column than the second column, but we want to make sure to include both there. Now let me mention a little bit about the names of the projects there. I'd be happy to get in the weeds. It might be better one-on-one, but the first one is East Bank Boulevard going from Korean Veterans to Victory. So that's barely a quarter mile or so of East Bank Boulevard. It's the very start of East Bank Boulevard. Then Waterside Drive is what would go along the river next to basically from the pedestrian bridge to Korean Veterans. And then what's called MCM extension is that's the pedestrian bridge, Music City Mile extension, the part that Fallon would build. And then Sylvan is on the road between parcel G on the map and where the scrapyard is located. And the next one is the Music City Mile, otherwise known as the pedestrian bridge over the East Bank Boulevard. There's a Colonial Pipeline that needs to be relocated. And then along TPAC, there will be Victory Avenue needs to be worked on, as well as Waterside Drive, which is between where TPAC will be and the river. And then finally, the Music City Mile or pedestrian bridge alongside TPAC. The section at the bottom there that I want to talk about for a minute, optional. I think I'm nearly certain, as certain as I can be without us doing more analysis, that this is not a thing that Metro is going to want to spend money on anytime soon. I anticipate that this would not be in a capital spending plan coming up. But I want to describe what it is because it's a potential cost years in the future. And the Cliff Notes version is that in the stadium financing deal approved a year ago, Metro agreed to provide 2,000 parking spaces for every football season for the Titans, where the Titans receive the revenue on any event days. And Metro in the short term is going to rely on surface parking spaces, should be adequate to provide that, that obligation of 2,000 spaces every season. If we wanted to get a head start on turning surface parking spaces into vertical parking spaces and structured parking garages, this is meant to indicate what the cost would be to add a parking garage with 600 spaces next to the football stadium and adjoining a hotel that Fallon will build on what's called Parcel C, right next to the football stadium. Again, for now, we felt obligated to price it out and look at it. We think it's in Metro's best interest to continue to rely on surface parking for at least the period of time that the football stadium is under construction. And then, frankly, we're hoping that the office building market turns around at some point. And if that were to happen, we would look to have parking spaces that we owe the football team to be cohabitated with an office building. So the spaces could be used for office use during the day and for events in the evening and weekends. The city has moved in the direction from an urban planning point of view of trying to not overpark, not build too many parking spaces. Part of last year in the council's effort, maybe it was a year and a half ago, to remove parking requirements out of whatever we removed them from. But the UDO, thank you. UZO, thank you, Vice Mayor. Part of the thought process was the market's going to build enough parking spaces for whatever use they have in mind, and that the government wouldn't demand a certain minimum level of spots. And what we've tried to do with what we're doing on the East Bank is we want to make sure that we don't come back in 30 years and replace a bunch of horizontal parking spaces that are empty 300 days a year with pillars of parking that are empty 300 days a year. So if we end up having to have the taxpayers pay for vertical parking spaces that are stadium only, we don't see any reason to hurry that day on. So the costs on here for transparency, it is not something that we intend to do. And so the first section of items that take up most of the page is where your attention should be for the infrastructure cost. Next, lease terms. There's more details on the coming pages, and so this slide suffers from the problem of having too few words, and you'll see that the next slide suffers from the problem of having too many words. But when we're talking about a 99-year ground lease, it's hard to say it in a way that makes immediate sense. You know, one question I've gotten is, so what's the rent? And people are looking for a number, and the answer is we can't give a number of what the rent's going to be on buildings that haven't been built yet. And so what we've come up with is a methodology where the rent will be figured out to be based on fair market value at the time that the buildings go online and we start to get rent. And then there's also a concept of participation rent that I'll talk about. So I'm sure you all have been now through the slide with too few words, and I will share the slide with a lot of words. It's a lot of words, but let me break it into the two sections that are listed here: market-based rent and future participation rent. The market-based rent, what we're going to do is, once the downtown code is amended, hopefully later this summer, to extend to the initial development area, we'll then appraise the value of all the land, and then we will say a lease is signed 5 years later for a certain parcel. That appraised value will be increased by the consumer price index, and then it'll be multiplied by a lease yield, and it will tell us what the rent is. And then we're going to have annual increases to give us, give the city more money based on whatever the consumer price index is. It's going to be 2.5% per year, and then every 10 years there will be an adjustment. We're going to have an example on the slide out, the next slide, to try to turn this into numbers for numbers people. And then future participation rent, again, a lot of words that say for all the buildings that are going to be built other than the affordable housing buildings, when they are sold or there's a cash out refinancing, Metro will get a percentage of the gross either sales proceeds or the cash out of a refinancing. And this is designed to get Metro to be able to, for lack of a better phrase, participate in the equity when these buildings change hands over the course of 99-year ground leases. I think for folks that follow these things, it's not, market conditions indicate how often buildings change hands, but very large buildings like this, one might expect to change hands every 7 to 12 years. Some would be more, some would be less, but about that frequency. And so there would be this future participation rent would happen presumably more than once through the course of the term of the lease. This is an attempt to put what I just said with the too few words into numbers as an example. For the market rate, for the example, we've assumed a 2-acre site valued at $7 million per acre. And then for a lease yield for residential buildings, we've agreed on 4%. We believe that's market based on the experts we've talked to. So you would take the $14 million value and multiply it by the 4% lease yield rate and get the base rent for year one. And then again, every year, the rent would go up by 2.5%. And then every 10 years, if the actual consumer price index had been higher than the 2.5% on average, we'd have an opportunity to capture another 0.25% up to 2.75 for the next 10 years. And on the participation rent, obviously this is hypothetical because the buildings haven't been designed yet, but we think it's a reasonable hypothetical. For a residential building worth $240 million, it would yield Metro $1.8 million upon a sale of the building. And again, we would expect these buildings to change hands multiple times during a 99-year ground lease. So that's the rent. And I'm going to shift next to talking about workforce development and let Mr. Ah talk through that.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about what we're going to build, how it's going to be paid for, but I think it's equally important certainly to talk about how we're going to build it. So this slide, again, a little bit of a table of contents, and I'll talk through each of these in a little more detail, but really emphasizing the importance of how we build, and in particular, the workers that will be building this project. So these are themes that will be present throughout what we're doing here, and I can, again, talk about them in a little more detail. But they're really Fallon Company standards and things that we believe in through all of our projects and really look forward to emphasizing here on the East Bank. Go to the next slide, please. So the first one is workforce development. And really the overarching goal here is to create jobs on this project for Nashville residents. We really want to emphasize having a local populace that's going to be providing the work on this project, and then, utilizing existing workers, but also growing capacity. And so there's up here listed a number of things we're going to do in order to increase that workforce and then utilize that workforce as we go forward. And I want to also say that we're going to be emphasizing outreach as part of this. We can set up all these great workforce development programs, but if folks don't know about the job opportunities, don't know about the workforce development opportunities, then I don't think we've really done our job. So that's going to be a real emphasis for us. And then also making sure as part of the outreach, making sure that subcontractors and workers really feel like there's a level playing field and are able to really go out and try to capitalize on these opportunities and participate in the project. Go to the next slide. So one again, another element of that is emphasizing diversity through those various outreach and workforce development efforts. And so, again, we're looking to set a market leading standard here and do something beyond what's been done in the market to date. So you'll see up here some goals that we have for the design consultants, for the construction work, also for our development partners who are here with us today. So Pillars Development and Holiday Ventures, but also throughout every element of the project, really looking to capitalize on that diversity. And then you heard me say it on the last slide, I'll say it again, the outreach, again, really being key for all of this. Wage theft prevention. This is an important topic. It's something we haven't ever had on one of our job sites, but we know it's a real problem and something we are paying extra attention to and being extra diligent about as we set up how we're going to run the project and make sure that there are protections in place so that wage theft doesn't happen. And then if it does happen, so that there's an ability to remedy it quickly as part of the project. So there's a couple things up here that really talk about how we're going to do that. We're also going to be having dedicated folks as part of the management of the project that will be resources to the workers so they can go if they have any questions or any problems. And as part of that, also having a really comprehensive language access program so that there's no barriers. Language won't be a barrier, for example, to folks being able to, talk to someone and make sure that this doesn't happen. And then next slide, please. And then finally here, construction safety. We can do all of the things that I just talked about, workforce development, emphasizing diversity, combating wage theft. But if we don't have a safe work site where workers can come to work, be safe and go home at the end of the day, then we haven't done our job. So it's a real priority for us at Fallon. It's something that we feel very comfortable with. But again, just want to mention that that's something we'll be very focused on.
Thanks, Brian. Now, moving on to TPAC and the memorandum of understanding that is the second piece of legislation. And again, so unlike the development agreements, which are in an ordinance with 3 readings, this is in a resolution asking for approval of a non-binding memorandum of understanding with TPAC. And it would be subject to us negotiating full, complete documents with TPAC and bringing back for approval with a 3-reading ordinance during the summer. This is just there's nothing going on here other than the fact that with the limited amount of time since the O'Connell administration came in office, we needed to focus on the development agreement, and this one has lagged a little bit. So we've got a memorandum of understanding. We feel very good about it. I think TPAC feels very good about it, but I want to make sure y'all understand it's subject to bringing definitive documents back this summer. This having TPAC on the East Bank would check the box, will check the box on having where Imagine East Bank highlighted the need for cultural uses on the East Bank, and it would you see the location there. The design would be subject to Metro approval, which you'll see described in the documents, and in addition to TPAC taking on several infrastructure projects surrounding their property, the ground lease would be for TPAC for 35 years with nominal rent. We're focusing on the infrastructure with them rather than the rent. And importantly, TPAC has promised to keep the pedestrian bridge open throughout construction. And so there shouldn't be any shutdowns through there. And at this point, Chair, we've been at it for about 40 minutes. Oh, and let me talk about legislative timing before questions. Sorry. On this, there's basically 2 sets of legislation. What we have now, the ordinance for the Master Development Agreement, the TPAC MOU resolution, and part of what we're doing in the development agreement is modifying some of the stadium site coordination documents that were passed by the council last year. And that was contemplated in the documents passed last year, and we need to take care of that now. And then this summer, we would expect to bring the downtown code extension to the initial development area, what's called a pedestrian bridge declaration, which would talk about how the parties who are neighbors to the pedestrian bridge will maintain it and keep it open. And the TPAC development agreement and lease would come during the summer. We're going to try to get those all on the same track during the summer, so y'all can consider it as a package and think about it in package. And with that, Chair, we would open it to questions.
All right. Thank you all for the presentation. Do any committee members have questions, comments, anything for our presenters? Well, I have. Okay, we'll go to Councilmember Rollin Horton in the back. Councilmember Horton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, for calling on me, despite not being a member of the committee. I have a question for Mr. Mendez. Just curious if you might be able to explain the relative merits of building so many affordable housing units at this site as opposed to using revenue we might have otherwise to fund affordable housing construction elsewhere in the city, where perhaps those dollars might go further, as well as the neighborhood itself might be more affordable for the occupants of those units.
Yeah, that's a good question. I appreciate that. The starting point for everything we've been doing is the Imagine East Bank plan. And, one of the reasons why we include those initial slides is we're trusting the fact that Imagine East Bank was literally, I think, the most robust community engagement process for a plan that the city is seeing at any point went on. You heard the details. You guys know the details. Went on for a couple of years, thousands and thousands of engagements. And what the community said in Imagine East Bank was that affordable housing was an important piece of this neighborhood to make this neighborhood be a mixed income neighborhood. And what I've heard from Fallon in the months we spent negotiating is that they value that too, to have a successful neighborhood, that it should be mixed income. So there's no question that if somebody was just parachuting in with their last $100 and saying where's the most bang for their buck, maybe immediately adjacent to downtown wouldn't be the right answer. But that's not what we're doing. And the charge we've gotten on the East Bank team is to bring Imagine East Bank into existence. And we've taken seriously what the community told us in the Imagine East Bank plan. So that's how I've been thinking about it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other committee members or council members have questions, comments? I've got a couple. So, as I understand it, looking at the mobility hub site, the three big kind of infrastructure milestones that really need to be met before that site could be activated are the bringing of James Robertson to grade, the demolition of the existing Nissan Stadium, and then the construction of that remaining stretch of the East Bank Boulevard. Is that correct?
I might have put it a little bit differently, and I'll look over to Jeff Oldham to correct me. I think the document technically requires James Robertson Parkway to be brought down to grade and just so, I guess for folks watching the video right now, the parcel farthest to the left on the screen that's highlighted is where the mobility hub will be. And James Robertson Parkway is the road to the left of that parcel. Right now it's 25 feet in the air. So one of three things is James Robertson Parkway come down to grade. Number two is the East Bank Boulevard, which is shown at the bottom of that parcel with the little tree-lined street in front of it, East Bank Boulevard has to be in existence, which it isn't today. And then the third condition in the documents is that WeGo needs to be prepared to move forward with their portion of the, what will be mobility hub on the ground floor or floors and housing above it. So those are the three conditions. Practically speaking, the football stadium will have to be gone, but that's not one of the conditions listed in the agreement, Chair.
Thank you. And I know it's very early, lots of variables will go into play, but can you put an estimate, maybe a best case and a less than best case scenario of when, maybe ignoring the WeGo piece, when those things, obviously the stadium would be demolished after 2027. I'm just asking for an estimate, a time estimate.
Sure. And on this, I think my team will probably shoot me if I don't put like just a built-in plus or minus 2 years on this. Best case scenario for James Robertson Parkway would be that somewhere around the time that the football stadium is a season or two open, James Robertson Parkway is down to grade. For East Bank Boulevard going in through there, I would say best case scenario 2030-ish is probably best case scenario for James Robertson Parkway. And I know that seems impossibly far in the future. And just for folks watching, I'm going to reiterate, the entire gulch is 60 acres. And Metro is looking at 130 acres here. This area that's Metro owned is twice the size of the gulch. And the dates I just said seem like a long way in the future, but building at this scale that will feel quicker than it sounds.
Thank you for that explanation. And yeah, I was hoping to just provide some context for the scale. So thank you for doing that. And as a side note, we're going to have at the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee next month a presentation about Connect Downtown, and the East Bank Mobility Hub is an integral part of what they're looking at doing with our bus system, with the three different bus stations. So I just wanted to give folks that context of how far off that would be. So thank you so much. On looking at some of the affordable housing pieces in Schedule 5111, there's language in there that the ground tenant shall provide owner with an affirmative marketing plan for the affordable housing units. Would it be possible for or have y'all considered using the affordable housing dashboard that's being developed by the housing division as the sort of, if it meets the needs, it's the first choice? Obviously, if there's a different need for a marketing strategy, I would understand that, but we have this place that we've been trying to, once it's up and running, to put all of the Metro connected affordable housing opportunities in. So have y'all talked with the housing division about the possibility of utilizing that to connect people with these properties?
Yeah, our housing division folks have been involved every step of the way in drafting the language you're looking at. Part of what we've been trying to accomplish with the way we word the documents, keeping in mind this, a lot of time is going to pass by, and just keeping in mind the last 8 years where, I don't know, was it 3 mayors, 4 finance directors, 3 legal directors, 3 NDOT directors, trying to keep in mind the sort of inherent turnover of government. We try to avoid naming specific places in government that we're not 100% sure are going to continue to exist, 6-8 years in the future. And so what we mean by that language is that it's a program satisfactory to what is today our housing division, folks, is what we mean by that. And you can ask, I don't know if Brian, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. Flexibility over time, but also making sure that we do it in the most efficient way possible so that folks who are looking for those affordable housing opportunities are able to access them in a comprehensive and understandable way.
Thank you. And my last question about the affordability stuff, I really appreciated seeing in there for the, it's a long-term, the income-restricted residential units within market buildings. There's language that folks living in those units who experience income growth that would price them out of eligibility for those units basically get to stay in their unit, or the option to stay in their unit, and then that unit then becomes a market unit, and then another unit in the building is designated as a income restricted residential unit within a market building. And I was sitting here thinking of this, how complicated it would be was apparent, but is it possible to offer that same opportunity to folks in the dedicated affordable housing buildings to be able to stay if they have income growth that prices them out of eligibility in those buildings, to then have access to a market unit in the market buildings? Or does that become too complicated because there might be different owners of different buildings? Is that feasible to implement, or to at least incentivize in some way?
Yeah, Chair, I'm going to see whether anybody else on my team has a comment on that. We do have to assume that, I don't know how many years in the future, 15 to 20 years in the future at least, that the buildings will definitely be owned differently. And so we've definitely had to assume that there may be no common ownership among the buildings. Once you get 20, 25, 30, some number of years in the future, we have to assume they will not be co-owned. Then I know there's, with federal LIHTC credits being involved with the all affordable buildings, I believe there's sort of a harsher set of realities as far as folks who get outside who start earning more. But I'm going to see whether, I don't know, Brian, you have any additional comment on that?
No, I think you said it exactly right. It's in the market buildings that have the 10% affordable, as Bob, you mentioned, we have more flexibility there because we don't have the rigidity of the federal tax credits and the other devices that are used to fund those all affordable buildings. So it's a great question, probably limited ability to be able to do that as a practical matter.
Thank you. Okay, any other members? I see the vice mayor here as well. Happy to recognize you if you have any questions. I see Councilmember Cap. We'll go to Councilmember Cap. You're recognized.
Thank you. Just quickly, Mr. Mendez, I wanted to clarify something. You may have said this already, but the East Bank Boulevard, when you were talking about the conditions that would allow, for the transit hub to come online, is it the case that East Bank Boulevard won't extend north of Victory Boulevard until all of those conditions for the mobility hub are met?
Well, the biggest impediment to East Bank Boulevard going north of Victory, and for those of you who don't know, Victory is a street that runs on the screen to the left of Parcel E. That's north of Parcel E. And so the biggest impediment to going further than that is the big old football stadium that's there now. And so that's, figure end of 28 ish before the football stadium is fully removed. And then beyond that, we as a city might not want to work on the East Bank Boulevard beyond Victory until James Robinson Parkway is out of the way, because otherwise we'll have a lovely boulevard that runs into James Robinson Parkway in an unhelpful way. And the crystal ball of knowing what's going to happen first, James Robinson Parkway down to grade or football stadium, being enough out of the way to work on it, coupled with our desire ultimately to have some federal funding sources for the boulevard if we can. It's hard to know exactly what the sequence of those things are going to be, other than we're going to work that problem with the idea of we really want it there sooner rather than later.
Thank you. And Chair, one other quick question.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mendez, are there provisions in the lease for any of our partners to pay for upgrades to the portion of Shelby, between Fifth and downtown or KVB, in terms of pedestrian safety or medians or plantings or bike lanes or anything like that? Or is that something that would be on just the city's capital funding?
So the first question, there isn't anything in the agreement about Shelby slash KVB. On the second question, like I understand from NDOT that the goal, this is another one where the goal would be to get funding from other governmental entities, federal government, hopefully, to help with that. Because it is, I mean, y'all are familiar with that. It's, it's not going to be just a couple-minute job to try to slow down traffic successfully on KVB. So it's in Imagine East Bank to have it be I forgot the technical term, a what boulevard? What did you? Median separated boulevard is what is designed, shown in Imagine East Bank, and that is the goal.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I noticed the median separation there on the map as well, and was excited to hear that that's part of the plan. Councilmember Vo, you are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for the updates. This question is for Brian. Regarding the small minority women-owned business goals, can you talk a little bit more about what dedicated outreach looks like?
Sure, and I think it'll take a little bit of a different form depending on which element we're talking about. So certainly as part of the construction bidding, for example, there will be very clear bidding priorities, emphasizing diversity as part of the criteria for awards there. We'll also do job fairs, do outreach in the communities to folks where there's likely to be a lot of those workers coming from in order to make sure people understand the opportunities. Similarly, on the design standpoint, from a design standpoint, which was one of those other elements, similar things, with the design community really emphasizing in our RFPs and our outreach to architecture firms and other types of firms that diversity is an important element for us on that standpoint. So it'll vary a little bit depending on what specifically we're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And one more question. I'm not sure if it's too early, but with the TPAC MOU, some community members were discussing how, the National School of the Arts and, with TPAC, if this MOU goes through, would that be something in conversation? I know it was maybe discussed in the past, but just wanted to bring that up with some constituents who are concerned or wanted to know what the reality of that, or if that would be later on in discussions.
I'm going to add a caveat. I do my very best to not criticize prior administration. Like, there's never been a serious conversation about National School of Arts being on the East Bank in any way that was really serious. And so we did not inherit any serious conversation about that, and none is ongoing, just to be really direct about it.
Thank you, Councilmember Vo. Anyone else with questions or comments? Okay, well, if that's it for our presenters, we will thank them for all the information and for joining us here this afternoon. And we've got a little bit of committee business to discuss. But again, thank you all so much for joining us for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Brian. All right, so really what we have remaining is discussion about the committee's next scheduled meeting. If we feel there's anything else that we need to schedule, put on the books, and just anything else that committee members and other council members would like to see from this committee or the council process generally as it relates to these proposals. So currently we have what I've dubbed a working session scheduled for March 20th. We're going to be down in the jury assembly room in the basement or ground floor. Just if you've never been down there, ask the security guards. They'll make sure you find your way down there. And the purpose of that is to have less of a presentation style and more of a looking through the agreements in detail, asking questions. We will have folks there who can answer questions during that, but the plan is not to have a long presentation, but more to just have some discussion among committee members and other council members who choose to join us about specifics of the legislation that's before us. And again, that's scheduled for March 20th. It's a Wednesday, 4:30 in the jury assembly room. Is there any other questions, discussion about this committee, scheduling, future, anything from members or non-members that are here? Sounds like everybody's ready to go get some dinner or something. So we will, with no further business, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.